let's start with some thinking. What would the young people have done differently in 1337 if they had known that just 10 years later, 60% of the entire population in Europe would be killed by the Great Plague? What would the young people like you and me in 1904 have done differently if they had known that 10 years later the greatest war in modern times would break out? And what would the young people in 1935 would have done differently if they had known that 10 years later in their own country the biggest genocide in history would have taken place? These young people, that's us. That's you. Every single one of you. And those 10 years, that's exactly the 10 years we have from now to 2030. And even if we don't feel it, the crises I've just explained are in no way different to the crises we face, which are very likely to evolve into those catastrophes if we don't act now. So let's take climate. I mean, climate scientists are very clear that if we don't act in these 10 years, every action afterward will be fruitless, will be not effective. We will not be able to stop climate change anymore. Which means that 70% of all space on Earth will be probably not habitable. You can imagine what this means. Let's take technological unemployment through automation. I mean, statistics differ, but what is clear, if we don't reinvent what work and jobs will mean, maybe 50% will be unemployed in 10 years. I don't know what this will mean to society and what kind of social unrest we will experience. It's the same with populism, fake news, and trust. If we don't act now, if we don't find a way to build social cohesion again, it's very likely that democracy and liberal democracy as we know it now will be gone in 10 years. So just to rephrase what the General Secretary of the UN said very well, we are in a race for our lives, but at the moment, what we can see, we are losing. So what I want to say is that we are really at a turning point right now. I think urgency was never greater than now, and we have to make a choice. Because if you have 10 years, which are like less than 4,000 days, this is not a lot. But it's still enough to use those crises and put them into an opportunity. So we have to create crisis-unities. But this is a choice we make, because if we don't act courageously, the path is clear where we're heading. This is the default path we are on right now. So the question is, how do we turn it? So what is our master plan to get there? And I think one thing we have to stop is expecting other people to solve those challenges. So still many of us say, well, we have, they're the business leader, they're the politicians, they are elected, they have the power, they should do it. But they won't. And if you face a huge catastrophe, it's not a good option to say other people will do it if they don't do it. They haven't done it for the last 20 years, they won't do it for the next 10 years. It's not because they're not leaders who are really willing, but they are trapped. Many of them are trapped. Business leaders are trapped in short-term maximization of their profits of their shareholders, and politicians, they are trapped in their party politics and the day-to-day business. How do we deal with that? So I think we have to bring the responsibility back to us. I think what is good about that is that the young generation is ready for that. hundreds of thousands of people, they're already quitting their jobs. They're quitting their jobs in consulting. They're quitting their jobs in banking because they don't want to waste their time in the light of the catastrophes we're facing. That's good news. At the same time, we see tens of thousands of young people in Germany on the streets every Friday, and they are politicized and they are willing for change. That's good news as well. So the young generation is ready in a way. But we haven't figured out the leverage point where we can have the biggest impact. Because still we see with protest on its own, this will not be sufficient if we want these 10 years really to matter. And not only kind of cynically talk about that and then look back in 10 years and say, well, we didn't know that. So my belief is that we have to apply the startup mindset, the entrepreneurial spirit to the biggest challenges of our time. Why? Because I think that the startups in the last 15 years, they have shown us, in the business perspective, they have shown us what really can drive change in a world which is highly complex, which is highly uncertain, which is highly volatile. What I mean with the startup mindset is basically these three things, which some of you might know from Eric Ries: start small, move fast, and fail early. And some of the entrepreneurs we know now in big corporates, Facebook, Google, Airbnb, they really got that. They got that if you want to solve a problem where you don't know the solution yet, you cannot sit down, top down, sit on your desk and draft the solution. You have to get out, you have to be courageous, you have to fail all over again. So what I mean, why I think that for the social and environmental challenges we face, why this is so important, because it's the same. We have huge uncertainty. We know that we have to bring down the carbon emissions, but we don't know exactly what will be the solutions to get there. What will be more effective? If you don't know that, you have to test hundreds of different options to figure out quickly which ones are the most effective. And I think the second case is that what is so beautiful about the entrepreneurial method is that you don't put your leverage on arguments only. You don't put your arguments on like discourse, but your biggest argument is making the case. Making the case that there is a solution out there, and you show people that a different world is possible. There's no stronger argument than actually making the case. So I give you 3 examples of outstanding impact entrepreneurs who really already disrupted, or on the way to disrupt ways of like how we live, and actually are very good in solving one of like a few of the challenges we face. So maybe the most famous one at the moment, not in Germany, is Elon Musk, because Elon Musk asked himself, after he got already a lot of money from PayPal, he asked himself, what do I have to do to bring carbon emissions down? That was his question. And he realized that no one believes that electric vehicles can replace the current car industry. So he was forced to go out and to do it and to fail all the time. I mean, he's still failing all the time. But he has put pressure on the car industry as no one else did it. The investments going into electric mobility and the shifts governments are taking already or preparing to take all over the world would not have happened without Elon Musk. Second example, a Berlin startup called Original Unverpackt, founded by Milena. Milena had the belief that supermarket grocery shopping has to happen without plastic. The supermarket chains basically told her that this is not possible. This will not work in terms of logistics, in terms of the supply chains. But she did it. She developed a supermarket without any plastic, and by making the case, she actually put the pressure on the supermarket chain. She basically put the pressure on Brussels to get the regulation out for the prohibition for one-time use plastic. Third case. There's Patrick. Patrick, also based in the US. And he realized that to stop climate change and to end this endless suffering of animals, we basically cannot just tell people to stop eating meat, because this will not happen in time. We don't have this time to wait. We have to really create alternatives. So Patrick was able, with Impossible Foods, to create meat without animal meat, which is identical in taste, and is now getting scaled to all Burger Kings this week. I mean, these stories, this is what shapes reality. And then the question is, of course, what is holding us back? What is holding us back are two things. The one thing is that change is only attractive once it is done. The majority will always be averse to change. They will like it when it's done. But the question is, how do people who actually drive the change, how do they make it happen until it is done? Because there will never be a huge innovation without huge disagreement beforehand. All those people I know, they faced huge criticism, huge rejection in everything they did until it was done. And the second thing is, the role of impact entrepreneurs is not to change the world on their own, but their role is much more to make the case to be first mover and then to inspire others and to put politics and corporates under pressure to follow them. And those two lessons, that was my way to impact entrepreneurship and to building TEDxTalks as the largest social incubator in Germany, because what Linus just mentioned, as a 16-year-old, I spent a few months in the UK in the Northwest, and I met a schoolmate from Syria, and he asked himself, what could he do to change the Syrian conflict? And I mean, this is certainly, this is a powerless situation. What should a 16-year-old schoolboy do against this huge macro-political conflict? But he started with an awareness campaign. He started with an awareness campaign at his school, and somehow we managed to bring it to the parliament, to bring it to the prime minister, and to get it scaled to 52 constituencies in the UK. I mean, this awareness campaign didn't obviously change the Syrian conflict, but it changed the mindset of the young people in England. What it means is that you have to start, you have to face disagreement, you have to face even rejection, but then at the same time, you also think about what are the players you want to involve to really have systemic impact. So not kind of think only in the isolated way, that as if you would be the only one on earth. So I think those are the two lessons. And that's the two lessons what we've been doing now for the last 7 years. So if we take this together, I think what is necessary is to understand that every one of us is part of this theory of change. Impact entrepreneurs, I think we will see as one fundamental agent of change in the next years. And it's nothing where it's just a few people selected for that. Because the future is bottom up. Top down will not work. Bottom up means that every single one of you can ask him or herself, what is the one thing I really care about? What is the problem I really identify with? And then start with something, even if you don't have the resource, even if you don't have the skills. But start where you are. Start what you have and start now. Because I think only then we have the chance that if our children and grandchildren will look back, they will say, well, they faced big crises. But differently to all others, they knew it, and they were even able to take action early enough. And so what I mean is, even today, if you care about climate change, or if you care about the European election, for example, because many young people probably will not vote, and so the young generation will not have a voice in the next 5 years, which is very dramatic in the light of the 10 years we only have. If you care about the European election, and think about how can you activate friends or people who are here today actually to go to vote. So I will do that in the break just to take a first step, so you will see it, what I will do. But what I mean is, start now means really start now. And when we think back on those 10 years and 4,000 days, I mean, if we are cynical and if we think, okay, well, he's saying that, but actually I go back and I will not do anything, I mean, then we knowingly accept the catastrophes. And that's why we have faced a choice. Every one of us is this choice where we have to decide whether we think that the 21st century will be the last one we live in, as we are now, or it will be the best one. And it really can be the most wonderful. Thank you very much.